Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation of Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Thursday, June 10th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. Well, look, it's been a very, very busy day. There's a lot going on in the news. We see the efforts for voter suppression continue, and we see while the GOP is going back into the trick bag of history, they are at the same time passing laws at the state legislature level, to further restrict what type of history can be taught and what can be taught about history. Did you see All In with Chris Hayes on Wednesday, June 9th, 2021? All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. He did a fantastic segment dealing with GOP repeats voter suppression history while attacking instruction of that history. GOP repeats voter suppression history while attacking instruction of that history. Now, this deals with what I have been talking about day after day after day, because I'm looking at what's taking place, and at the same time, I'm a historian, and I see them passing laws to further restrict the type of history that can be taught, what can be taught about history in schools at the state level. This false attack on critical race theory, and most Republicans can't tell you what critical race theory is. And critical race theory is not even taught at the K through 12 level. That's taught basically in graduate schools and college, and it's taught in law school. So as we've been saying, critical race theory has become a trick bag for Republicans just to throw into it everything that they don't like dealing with racism, and they just call that critical race theory. Then we see that Florida bans teaching critical race theory in schools. CNN.com has an article about this. Detroit News has an article about this from June 10th, 2021. Florida has become the latest state to ban critical race theory, continuing the growing charge by Republican lawmakers against schools teaching about systemic racism. After hours of debate and public comment, Thursday, June 10th, 2021, the Florida State Board of Education unanimously approved the amendment banning critical race theory. But critical race theory is not being taught in schools. So why do you have to ban it? So we're going to deal with this on today's show. So on All In with Chris Hayes on Wednesday, June 9th, he had historian and professor of African American history from Emory University, Dr. Carol Anderson, on. And Dr. Carol Anderson is an author as well. Her latest book is called The Second, referring to the Second Amendment, The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America. So this, and what she said was, what's taking place right now is Mississippi 1890 all over again. Mississippi 1890 all over again. What happened November 1st in 1890 in Mississippi? The Mississippi State Constitution was adopted. The Mississippi State Constitution of 1890. In the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890 that was adopted November 1st, 1890, it included provisions that allowed poll taxes and arbitrary literacy tests for voting. Sections designed to disenfranchise newly franchised African American men and some poor white people. And Mitch McConnell, they compared what happened in 1890 to Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell saying, we don't need a new voting rights bill. We don't need the John Lewis voting rights bill. We don't need the H.R. 1. We don't need the For the People Act because it's already illegal to discriminate against people voting. Well, it was illegal in 1890 in Mississippi, but they found a way to do it. It was illegal in 1890 because of the 15th Amendment of 1870. It was illegal in 1890, but they found a way to do it. And when you look at, so I did a lot of research preparing for today's show. There's a segment from, I got some good stuff for y'all, seriously. The Zen Education Project has some information on this, but there's this article from Washington Post from last month, May 1st, 2021. Because I went and did some research on this. I'm familiar with the subject matter, but, you know, all these shows I go do research on as well to pull together this subject matter. So there's an article from May 1st, 2021 from Washington Post. And this deals with Mississippi adopting the state constitution November 1st, 1890. The name of this article from the Washington Post is called The Mississippi Plan to Keep Blacks from Voting in 1890. The Mississippi Plan to Keep Blacks from Voting in 1890. Quote, we came here to exclude the Negro. Quote, we came here to exclude the Negro. Well, who said that? That was the convention's president, the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. The convention's president's name was Solomon Saladin Calhoun. Solomon Saladin Calhoun. He was a white county judge. He was a white man. He was a county judge, and he put the voting issue bluntly. He said, quote, let's tell the truth. If it bursts the bottom of the universe. See, Malcolm X said, make it plain. He made it plain. He said, let's tell the truth. If it bursts the bottom of the universe, we came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer, end quote. This is what happened at the Mississippi State Constitution, the Mississippi State Convention, adopting the state constitution in 1890. They made it plain. We came here to exclude the Negro. Well, that's what they're doing today. That's what the GOP is doing today. Okay? But they're a little more sophisticated with it. So we're going to dissect this on today's show. GOP repeats voter suppression history while attacking instruction of that history. It's the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890 all over again. Quote, we came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer, end quote. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's corrects wrong behavior, what you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with because you don't understand history is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you haven't taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now, we deal with a number of different topics here on the African History Network show. We deal with current events and history and politics, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Now, you can still register for the online course that I teach on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Ancient Kemet, one of the original names for Egypt, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of years of history, and we deal with what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. So if you go to our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, right on the home page, scroll down, and you'll see the information for our online course. It's a 10-week online course that I teach. Our next class is Saturday, June 12th, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our guest speaker will be Dr. David Imhotep, author of the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. And we're going to have a fantastic class with Dr. David Imhotep. You click right here on register, and it takes you to the next page, and click on enroll right here, and it enrolls you in the course. Course is regularly $130. It's on sale $60. It's 54% off right now because we're about halfway through the class. Now, we do the class live. You can ask questions through the live chat in the class. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. All the sessions are recorded. You can go back and watch it over and over again. So you can register for the online course. It's going to blow you away. As soon as you register, you can watch last Saturday's class. And also be sure to watch the class we did a few weeks ago with Sister Nubia Wardford, who's a African-American female archaeologist. We dealt with the origins of ancient Kush and the African queens of antiquity. The origins of ancient Kush and the African queens of antiquity. All right. So let's, I want to jump into this topic here. So we've been talking about this on this show frequently, and the attack on critical race theory. We just talked about the critical race theory on yesterday's show. And the attack on critical race theory, we dealt with that. So I was watching All In with Chris Hayes, and he had Dr. Carol Anderson on. And she mentioned Mississippi 1890. She said, this is Mississippi 1890 all over again. So in Mississippi, November 1st, 1890, they adopted their state constitution. Okay, this is after the Civil War ends. Civil War is 1861, 1865, 13th Amendment of 1865, 14th Amendment of 1868, 15th Amendment of 1870, guaranteeing the right to vote, protecting the right to vote for African-American men only. This does not apply to African-American women in 1870 in general. So if we look at the Zen Education Project, they talk about November 1st, 1890, November 1st, 1890, Mississippi Constitution. On November 1st, 1890, Mississippi, and let me blow this up here. Mississippi adopted a new constitution with a poll tax and arbitrary literacy test for voting. Sections designed to disenfranchise newly franchised African Americans and some poor whites. Because going back to 1870, so the 15th Amendment is adopted February 3rd, 1870. So we know the year 2020 was the 150th anniversary of the adoption of the 15th Amendment, or what's known as the sesquicentennial. Right after the 15th Amendment is adopted, you start having southern states trying to put obstacles in the way of African American men voting. Now, the new Constitution was a nail in the coffin for Mississippi Reconstruction and a win for voter suppression. Okay, Reconstruction is 1865 to 1877. All right, you're going to have African Americans who are voting. You have two African American senators, one from Mississippi, Hiram Rhodes Revels becomes a senator in 1870. And there has never been a African-American U.S. senator from Mississippi since Reconstruction. Hiram Rhodes Revels. There has not been one from Mississippi, African-American U.S. senator since then. The new Constitution was a nail in the coffin for Mississippi Reconstruction and a win for voter suppression. It brought an end to the period of democratic progress that followed the U.S. Civil War, when African Americans were the majority of eligible voters in Mississippi. African Americans were the majority of eligible voters in Mississippi during Reconstruction. James Lowen, who wrote the book Lies My Teacher Told Me, he wrote an article for the Zen Education Project called 5 Myths About Reconstruction. Read that, 5 Myths About Reconstruction. But he explains that Mississippi set a precedent for the rest of the South. This was particularly true after the unanimous Supreme Court vote on April 25th, 1898, upholding Mississippi's claim that their state constitution was not discriminatory in Williams versus Mississippi. This is the same argument Mitch McConnell's making today. He's saying, wait, it's already legal to discriminate against people voting, so you don't need new voter restriction laws, even though there are obstacles in the way of African Americans and others voting right now, and they're trying to put more obstacles in the way of it. We're going to deal with this on the other side of the break. You listen to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Hi, I'm Joel Wilson, President and CEO of JCW Computer Consulting, LLC, a technology implementation firm with over 20 years of satisfying customers. We offer a full spectrum of industry top-tier branded services. We are an authorized partner or reseller for Lenovo, Zoom, T-Mobile, Microsoft 365 and Surface tablets, Google Workspace, Acer, Asus, Samsung, PCmatic security software, and many more. Our online store features laptops, Chromebooks, computers, printers, accessories, and software. Businesses, take advantage of our free 1-hour Zoom tech consultation and know we offer top nationwide high-speed internet service providers, voice over IP, and cellular phone services. Home users, don't miss our current in-stock Chromebook inventory. Please visit us at jcwcc.com or call 215-879-6701.
Gain knowledge in minutes from insightful summaries of progressive and socially conscious books. Blacklisted gives you access to curated content that'll satisfy your curiosity to learn and understand different perspectives. Empower yourself through inspirational and actionable ideas. It's easy to read or listen to on the go. Blacklisted. Empower yourself. Start your free trial today.
Are you getting ready for fall or winter? We have the solution for all seasonal clothing needs. Kemeticwear.com is the go-to online source for Kemetic African fashion and lifestyle products with a contemporary twist. We're committed to offering unique styles reflecting our African heritage. Kemeticwear.com is inspired by KemeticScribes.com to influence our people in learning and showing pride. Please visit our website at Kemeticwear.com.
We all know the cannabis industry is headed toward an uprise in the past decade. What happens when there is a brand that brings this uprise in a blow? The cannabis industry welcomes her uprise. Hustle her hemp. Delivering excellence with pride is her watchword, and how you choose to embrace it makes it a priority. From cultivating rich cannabis into exquisite and tastefully finished CBD products to delivery, Hustle Her Hemp leaves no stone unturned. Hustle Her Hemp's mission is to empower women of color by building business and creating legacies, uniting beauty, health, and business. We are a pure definition of how we want the CBD industry to become in the future. While we are redefining innovation, we bring the same energy to improving the quality of life. Hustle Her Hemp is the new uprise.
Hi, I'm Joel Wilson, President and CEO of JCW Computer Consulting, LLC, a technology implementation firm with over 20 years of satisfying customers. We offer a full spectrum of industry top-tier branded services. We are an authorized partner or reseller for Lenovo, Zoom, T-Mobile, Microsoft 365 and Surface tablets, Google Workspace, Acer, Asus, Samsung, PCmatic security software, and many more. Our online store features laptops, Chromebooks, computers, printers, accessories, and software. Businesses, take advantage of our free 1-hour Zoom tech consultation and know we offer top nationwide high-speed internet service providers, voice over IP, and cellular phone services. Home users, don't miss our current in-stock Chromebook inventory. Please visit us at jcwcc.com or call 215-879-6701.
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM, the Superstation Future Radio. I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Thursday, June 10th, 2021, and we are live. Hope everybody's doing well. Calling number is 313-778-7600. It's the calling number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the calling number if you have a question or comment. So right before the break, I was talking about what's been taking place here recently and the increased voter suppression that we see from the GOP, how this relates to what happened in Mississippi in 1890 with the adoption of the Mississippi State Constitution. On Wednesday's edition of All In with Chris Hayes, he did a segment dealing with GOP repeats voter suppression. GOP repeats voter suppression. And he interviewed Dr. Carol Anderson. Dr. Carol Anderson, history professor at Emory University. She's an author as well. And they talked about how this is reminiscent of 1890. There's an article from the Washington Post called The Mississippi Plan to Keep Blacks from Voting in 1890. The Mississippi Plan to Keep Blacks from Voting in 1890. Quote, we came here to exclude the Negro. We came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer. This was a direct quote from Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was a White County judge at the 1890 State Convention, and he was the convention's president of the state convention there in Mississippi, where they adopted the state constitution. Okay, so 313-778-7600 is call-in number. You have a quick question or comment. Everybody share this on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. I want to go back to this article quickly here from the Zen Education Project. Then we're going to go to clip one, Shakita, from All In with Chris Hayes on MSNBC. And I was going to talk about another topic today, but as I got deeper into this research for this show, for this topic here, I said we're going to push the other topic to tomorrow. The other topic I wanted to deal with was the guy in the military whose microphone was cut off when he was at the Memorial Day celebration. It was a white guy in the military, and his microphone was cut off when he started talking about the role that African American slaves played in celebrating Memorial Day, and like the first Memorial Day in the African American involvement in that, and his microphone got cut off. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. That was really good. Okay, but in the piece called 5 Myths About Reconstruction by James Loewen, and James Loewen also wrote a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. He explains that Mississippi set a precedent for the rest of the South. This was particularly true after the unanimous U.S. Supreme Court vote. The unanimous U.S. Supreme Court vote on April 25th, 1898, upholding Mississippi's claim that their state constitution was not discriminatory in the Supreme Court case of Williams versus Mississippi. Quote, every southern state instituted literacy tests and poll taxes to effectively remove African Americans from the citizenship they were supposed to have been guaranteed by the 14th Amendment, end quote, said James Loewen, historian James Loewen. This can be seen in the state constitutions with similar voter suppression statutes adopted by South Carolina in 1895, 5 years after Mississippi adopts theirs. So Mississippi basically is going to be the first. Then these other southern states largely southern states, are going to do the same thing. South Carolina in 1895, Louisiana in 1898. We talked about Louisiana state constitution. We talked about that here on this show. Louisiana 1898, North Carolina 1900, Alabama 1901, Virginia 1901, Georgia 1908, Oklahoma 1910. Well, 11 years after they adopt the state constitution that has provisions making it harder for African Americans to vote. Well, that's when you had the Tulsa Race Massacre in North Tulsa in June 1st, 1921. Oklahoma 1910 and more. And more. But wait, there's more. So they talk about the 1964 booklet by SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, called Mississippi Subversion of the Right to Vote. Mississippi Subversion of the Right to Vote. Now, just yesterday we talked about Fannie Lou Hamer, who was born in Mississippi, and she was a member of SNCC. We know June 9th, 1963, she was dragged off a bus, taken to jail and beaten. And she was beaten so badly, she said her whole body was hard, and it took her 30 days to recover from it. And she suffered eye damage and suffered kidney damage from the beating. That was in Mississippi. So read this piece here from, now this picture here is session of the Mississippi State Legislature, the year of the Constitutional Convention. That's 1890. So these geniuses here were the ones who were at the Constitutional Convention. All right. There was one brother there. I think that was Isaiah T. Montgomery. He's in the back, of course. Well, there's one brother in the back and one here on the left. Okay. I don't see any biscuits in their hands or any tea, so I guess they weren't serving them then. But one of them, I think, in the back, all the way in the back, I think that's Isaiah T. Montgomery. Isaiah T. Montgomery was an African-American man. He's like the Tim Scott of Senator Tim. He's like Senator Tim Scott. Okay, we're going to talk about Isaiah T. Montgomery. He was the founder and mayor of Bayou, Mississippi, but he signed on and supported these restrictions in the 1890 Constitution that would make it harder for African Americans to vote. He supported that. Okay, he was the only one. There's the other one here on the side. I'm not sure who he is. He has an umbrella, looks like. So I'm the only African American delegate was Isaiah T. Montgomery. That's the only one I'm familiar with. I'm not sure who this other one is here, so we got to figure that out. I want to know if he's related to Tim Scott. I just want to know. Okay, so all right, let's do this. I want to go to this clip here from All In with Chris Hayes from MSNBC, and I'm going to narrate some of this because it's kind of a long clip, but this is a real history lesson. It ties into what's going on today, and it ties directly into the statements from Moscow Mitch McConnell over the past couple of days. And if we look at the article here from Newsweek.com, and this article is featured in this segment. So some of you all saw this segment on MSNBC on Wednesday, June 9th. And it's at MSNBC.com as well. Now, I sent them a note. I said, now he interviewed, after this segment, he interviewed Dr. Carol Anderson. Okay. Her segment is not on MSNBC's website as of yet. So I'm like, you need to put the sister's clip up there because she told the truth. But if we look at this article here from Newsweek.com, this is featured in they talk about this article here in the segment. Mitch McConnell comes out against unnecessary John Lewis Voting Rights Act. He called it unnecessary. Mitch McConnell comes out against unnecessary John Lewis Voting Rights Act. They may come out with a better title than comes out because some people may, their screen may not load quickly and they may just see half of that and think it's something else. So I don't know who came up with the title. Sometimes the writer of the article is not the one who came up with the title. Sometimes it's the editor who comes up with the title. Just because somebody writes the article does not mean they're the ones that came up with the title. So they may want to check that out again. That may not, Mitch McConnell comes out against unnecessary John Lewis Voting Rights Act. All right, they may want to revisit that one. But anyway, all right. So let's go to this clip here from MSNBC. GOP repeats voter suppression history while attacking instruction of that history. Take it off mute.
For the last 24 hours, I've been thinking about something that Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said yesterday. You may have seen he came out to announce that he is not just against the ambitious voting rights bill known as the For the People Act, but also the much more limited John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which would simply reestablish provisions of the Voting Rights Act that were struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013.
There's no threat to the voting rights law. It's against the law to discriminate in voting on the basis of race already. And so I think it's unnecessary.
Unnecessary. Already against the law to discriminate on the basis of race. Now, there's a bunch of stuff to unpack here. First, back in 2006, Mitch McConnell not only voted for reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act, but as majority whip, he was responsible for getting his Republican colleagues to vote for it too. Even took to the Senate floor to give a speech about it.
We have, of course, renewed the Voting Rights Act periodically since that time, overwhelmingly and on a bipartisan basis, year after year after year, because members of Congress realize that this is a piece of legislation that has worked. And one of my favorite sayings that many of us use from time to time is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this is a good piece of legislation that has served an important purpose over many, many years. This landmark piece of legislation will continue to make a difference, not only in the South, but for all of America and for all of us, whether we're African Americans or not.
15 years ago, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. You got to wonder when Mitch McConnell thinks it broke. For Mitch McConnell to come out yesterday and say, well, you see, it's already illegal to discriminate on the basis of race for voting, and not be the source of just universal ridicule and condemnation, speaks to just how absent the historical context of race and democracy is in all of our discussions today. McConnell says it's already against the law to discriminate from voting on the basis of race. And so he thinks a law policing that right is unnecessary. Now, there is a very obvious problem. Those who have studied the history of voting rights in America and the thwarted efforts to achieve a multiracial democracy in this country know it has been against the law to discriminate on the basis of race in voting since 1870, when the 15th Amendment was ratified, saying, quote, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. It says it right there in black and white in the U.S. Constitution. It says that you cannot racially discriminate in voting. And so you can imagine a version of Mitch McConnell in, 1920 Kentucky saying literally the exact same statement. Oh, well, why would we need a law to enforce voting rights? It's already illegal. Or say avowed segregationist Senator Strom Thurmond in the middle of filibustering the 1957 Civil Rights Act saying, quote, there are mainly three reasons why I feel the bill should not be passed. The first is that it is unnecessary. Every state has enacted some legislation making it unlawful to intimidate a voter or to hinder him in the exercise of his voting rights. Penalties have been provided for such violations. We don't need new laws to protect the right to vote, certainly not to protect against discrimination or race. Those already exist. It's in the Constitution. Those were the type of arguments segregationists made, Jim Crow authoritarians, decade after decade after decade after decade in this country, as they flogged multiracial democracy to death underneath the table as they gave those speeches. We are not discriminating. The law says we can't. Anyone can vote. This is how Senator James Eastland, a Mississippi notorious segregationist, the voice of the white South, put it to Mike Wallace.
Are you suggesting that your people down in the state of Mississippi encourage Negroes to register and vote?
Well, we have no voting qualifications based on race.
Well, under those circumstances,
we have none at all, and anybody who's qualified can vote.
Mississippi Senator, 1957. We have no voting qualifications based on race. Of course. Why would we? It's in the Constitution. We can't. The Constitution ratified in 1870 when Mississippi was under federal occupation. They're all saying the same thing. Strom Thurmond, James Eastland, and, well, Mitch McConnell, 64 years later. And McConnell says said this as he is threatening to filibuster the whole set of legislation meant to affirm the franchise. leading to a situation one critic described as a Senate that is a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. And so even though it has been the law since 1870, as Mitch McConnell says, that did not matter to the vast swaths of millions of ostensibly free Black Americans who watched their right to vote, the right to participate and self-govern, enshrined in the U.S. Constitution at the cost of the blood of hundreds of thousands. They watched that destroyed, eroded, and gutted by all kinds of means, extra-legal terrorism in the form of the KKK and lynch mobs, and armed coups that literally took governments away from them, which were multiracial in nature. That happened in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898. White people just storming the town hall, taking it over. And which I imagine you probably have not heard a lot about because it's not really taught in schools. In fact, armed coups taking power away from legitimately elected multiracial governments happened all over the South. Then, of course, there were the Jim Crow laws, which very studiously, explicitly avoided mentioning race because, again, the 15th Amendment said you cannot. And that's why we had these faux race-neutral restrictions, things like literacy tests, and grandfather clause, and name how many jelly beans are in the jar. Laws that made it almost impossible functionally for Black people to vote, despite the right being enshrined in the 15th Amendment. That is the whole story, the whole struggle for making real the promise of multiracial democracy and universal enfranchisement of all adults. So to come out in 2021 and say, well, the law prescribes it, just shows you know nothing about the history, or you wildly cynical, or both. You cannot understand the efforts of voter suppression. You can't understand what we're seeing today unless you understand its history, because it was precisely methods of ostensibly race-neutral voter suppression, for instance, changing the hours when the registrar was open or making only open once a month. Those were the methods used to enforce a successful, violent, reactionary movement in this country that took what was a nascent multiracial democracy in the years of Reconstruction and turned it back into an apartheid state. I've come to believe that story, the story of that fact, that in the wake of the Civil War, we began to put in place the foundations of multiracial democracy, and it was destroyed by a successful effort of white supremacy, is the most important story about America and the least told. When it is not told, it is in the absence of its telling that someone like Mitch McConnell or Republican legislators in Georgia or Texas or Florida can attempt to get away with their nothing to see here attempt to suppress the vote, targeting Black and brown people specifically so they can win elections, as has been the case for over a century. And of course, we see these methods all the way up to the federal government. The same goes for the filibuster. Central tool that McConnell's employing at the federal level to block things like the For the People Act, or now he opposes the Voting Rights Act, right? It may sound like just a weird vestige of history. Oh, there's a 50-vote threshold. That's weird. The history of the filibuster is also inextricably bound up with the history of race and Southern obstruction of Black enfranchisement. The person who first figured out what would become the modern filibuster, as Adam Gentleson writes in his great book on the subject, was John Calhoun. John Calhoun, the intellectual father of the Confederacy, the man who once famously said, slavery was not a necessarily evil, but, quote, a positive good. And yes, the filibuster was used for lots of different things, lots of places. But one of its core central uses was by Southern white senators to block anti-lynching bills in the 20s and 30s, and bills targeting employment and housing discrimination in the 40s and 50s, and to block civil rights bill after civil rights bill after civil rights bill. Earlier, I read a quote condemning the use of the filibuster to block voting rights. You know who said that? Martin Luther King Jr. Here he is, decrying the filibuster as essentially a tool of white supremacy in 1963.
The tragedy is that we have a Congress with a Senate that has a minority of misguided senators who will use the filibuster to keep the majority of people from even voting. They won't let the majority of senators vote. And certainly they wouldn't want the majority of people to vote because they know they do not represent the majority of the American people.
Wild to hear that, right? The statement is just as true now as it was 58 years ago. Everything old is new again. If you do not have this historical context, it is hard to truly appreciate what we are seeing in front of our faces. But that history is largely not taught in schools. People don't hear about Reconstruction and all that it represented. People don't know that the state of South Carolina had a majority Black lower house of Congress, lower house of state legislature in 1868. That Mississippi had a Black senator in 1970. I mean, I heard about it. I was lucky enough to have great teachers. Thank you, Mr. Kagan. But even that, not a ton. And that brings us to the assault on history that Republicans are now pairing with their assault on
Pause it right there, Shakita. Pause it right there. Back it up about a minute. Pause it right there, Shakita. Back it up about a minute. He said 1970. He meant 1870. 1870 was Hiram Rhodes Revels, who was the first and only U.S. Senator from Mississippi. Mississippi, the state who instituted this state constitution, November 1st, 1890, which made legal in the state of Mississippi poll taxes, literacy tests, different things like this. But they said it's for everybody, but they disproportionately imposed it for African Americans and let white people who were illiterate slide. This is what they did. Okay, so they said, "Oh no, this is not discriminatory. No, this is not directed towards white. This is not directed towards African Americans. This applies to anybody." But then they disproportionately imposed it against African Americans. November 1st, 1890, Mississippi Constitution. On November 1st, 1890, Mississippi adopted a new constitution with a poll tax and arbitrary literacy tests for voting. Sections designed to disenfranchise newly franchised African Americans and some poor whites. But they're going to use it disproportionately against African Americans. So we have this article now. I'm going to go back to the clip in just a second, but look at what just happened today in Florida. Now he's going to talk about the attack on critical race theory and probably the 1619 Project and what's being taught in schools. Look at what just happened today in Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican governor. Florida has a Republican-dominated state legislature. Florida bans teaching critical race theory in schools. Now, we just dealt with critical race theory in depth on Wednesday's show. Florida bans teaching critical race theory in schools. This is from June 10th, Thursday, 2021. Florida has become the latest state to ban critical race theory, continuing the growing charge by Republican lawmakers against schools teaching about systemic racism. Okay, if you look, go, I'm going to post the link here to the this clip from Chris Hayes and Shakita on 910's Facebook page on the thread on 910 for the Facebook live broadcast. Post the clip from MSNBC. Post the clip there. Everybody needs to go watch this. Okay. I've said this numerous times before. I've said this on Roland Martin's show. What they're doing, what Republicans are doing, what the GOP is doing, and Tim Scott laid this out Wednesday, August 28th, in the rebuttal speech on behalf of the GOP that he delivered, which was the rebuttal speech to Joe Biden's speech to the joint session of Congress. Okay. What they're doing is controlling the teaching of the past and at the same time making it harder for certain people to vote, especially African Americans, so they can control the trajectory of the future. So they're trying to box you in, controlling what can be taught about the past, and then control and then have more control over who can vote. So then they can control the trajectory of the future and the laws and policies that are written and put in place for the future. This is why we call this segment. This is why we call today's show GOP repeats voter suppression history while attacking instruction of that history. It's the Mississippi Constitution of 1890 all over again. But if you don't understand the history of the Mississippi Constitution of 1890, then all this won't click. This is history repeating itself. So also, I want to show you this article quickly, and then we'll go back to the clip, Shakita. Read this one here. We won't have time to get deep into it. Maybe on tomorrow's show or Sunday's show. This is a really good article here from history.com, official website of the History Channel. How Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. How Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. Okay? And they talk about in the wake of the passage of the 15th Amendment of 1870 and Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, several Southern states enacted laws that restricted African Americans access to voting. They're still doing it today. Okay. They talk about what did they talk about? The first thing they talk about is the Mississippi State Constitution of 1890. At the 1890 Mississippi State Constitution, a new state convention, a new constitution was adopted that included a literacy test and poll tax for eligible voters. Under the new literacy requirement, a potential voter had to be able to read any section of the Mississippi Constitution or understand any section when read to him or give a reasonable interpretation of any section. If you go watch Eyes on the Prize, if you watch the Eyes on the Prize, the first incarnation of Eyes on the Prize, they talk about this in here. They talk about how you had to be able to explain to the registrar one of the, it was something like 250 sections of the Mississippi State Constitution. To be able to vote, you had to be able to explain one of those sections of the state constitution. The registrar would pick out which section they want you to explain to them. Many times the registrar was illiterate or partly illiterate. And this is what they're implementing. Well, with the voter restriction bills today, it's history repeating itself. It's just a little different. A potential voter had to be able to read any section of the Mississippi Constitution or understand any section when read to him or give a reasonable interpretation of any section. James Vardaman in 1890 said, quote, there is no use to equivocate or lie about the matter. James Vardaman served in the Mississippi State Legislature at the time of the convention and later became governor of the state of Mississippi. He said, quote, in Mississippi, we have in our Constitution legislated against the racial peculiarities of the Negro. When that device fails, we will resort to something else. In Mississippi, we have in our state constitution legislated against the racial peculiarities of the Negro. When that device fails, we will resort to something else. Well, what's the something else? Is it possibly lynchings? Because Mississippi is the state that had the most number of lynchings. Something like 581 lynchings out of 4,743 from 1882 to 1968. Mississippi just happened to be the state with the most number of lynchings. Mississippi just happened to be the state where Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney, the three civil rights workers, were killed by the Ku Klux Klan June 21st, 1964. Mississippi just happened to be the state that Emmett Till was killed in Money, Mississippi, August 28th, 1955. The impact of the legislation of 1890 was swift. By 1910, registered voters among African Americans dropped to 15% in Virginia and under 2% in both Alabama and Mississippi, according to historian Donald G. Nyman in his book, Promises to Keep, African Americans and the Constitutional Order, 1776 to the present. Then they talk about the lawsuit that we just talked about briefly in the piece from the Zen Education Project, Williams versus Mississippi from 1898. Williams versus Mississippi, 1898. In 1898, Williams versus Mississippi ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld states' poll taxes, disenfranchisement clauses, grandfather clauses, which stated that if your grandfather couldn't vote because he was a slave, then that means you can't vote. The U.S. Supreme Court in this Supreme Court case of 1898, Williams versus Mississippi, upheld the state's poll taxes, disenfranchisement clauses, grandfather clauses, and literacy tests on the basis that the new Constitution did not discriminate between the races, and it has been shown that their actual administration was not evil, only that evil was possible under them. So they're saying the U.S. Supreme Court said they weren't put in place to discriminate against the Negro, but that's what they said they were trying to do in 1890 at the Mississippi State Constitution. That's what they're trying to do right now. But they're saying, wait a second, this is the game Mitch McConnell's running. He's hoping people are ignorant of history. This is the game Mitch McConnell's running. He's saying it's already illegal to discriminate against, it's already illegal to discriminate against people to keep them from voting. But that's exactly what your voter restriction bills in 361 state legislatures are trying to do. Read this article here from Washington Post once again. So I'm not going to have time to go deep into it. Maybe tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about it some more. The Mississippi plan to keep blacks from voting in 1890. Quote, we came here to exclude the Negro, end quote. That's a direct quote from Solomon Saladin Calhoun. The convention's president in 1890. He said, let's tell the truth if it bursts the bottom of the universe. He came here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer. Let's go back to All In with Chris Hayes, Shakita. MSNBC, let's go back to the clip. Take it off mute.
They're now pairing with their assault on voting rights. It's a kind of pincer movement, right? So they're digging in the archives for methods of voter suppression and targeted attacks on enfranchisement of black and brown folks, an attempt to roll back multiracial democracy to stop it from becoming real, while also attacking the teaching of the history that would illuminate to people why that effort is so dangerous.
Exactly.
Why it happened before and why it won last time and why it put us where we are now. And so state after state, Fox News and Republicans, conservatives have whipped up a moral panic about so-called critical race theory. More than 20 states have either introduced legislation to ban critical race theory or banned it altogether. Now, critical race theory is an actual doctrine, academic method started by a bunch of scholars of color in the 70s and 80s. It attempts to question some of the race-neutral assumptions about law and power and how they function, particularly in the U.S. I will tell you, I'm not an expert at it. I've read some of it. Like any school of thought, there are critics in the field and between scholars within the field. I don't think it's the definitive word on race and the law or American history. But it's a very different thing than how the term has been applied by conservative activists. A few months ago, Chris Rufo, one of the conservative activists who's pursuing this moral panic, whipping up, gave the game away, tweeting, quote, the goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and it will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans. Just pure cynicism. If you don't like it, then it's critical race theory. That's what he's saying. If you don't like it, if you don't want your white children being taught that, say, white terrorists murdered black people throughout the South in a successful campaign to end the experiment of multiracial democracy and replace it with authoritarian apartheid, well, then that's critical race theory. You see how that works? So now the Republicans are railing about free speech to basically make it.
All right. You stop. I guess we're out of time here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network. We definitely need to support $TheAHN Show through Cash App, $TheAHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHN Show, paypal.me/TheAHN Show. We'll pull up our graphic here. I'll be speaking in Atlanta for the Juneteenth Festival, June 18th through the 20th at Centennial Park. Visit JuneteenthATL.com for more information, JuneteenthATL.com for more information. And also 910 AM Superstation WFDF is going to air the 2021 Chevrolet Detroit Grand Prix on Saturday, June 12th, 1:30 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. and Sunday, June 13th, 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. hosted at Belle Isle Park. So tune in for that as well. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win Wakanda Forever. We'll talk to you tomorrow. I'll be on Roland Martin Unfiltered tomorrow as well. We'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. Talk to you later. Peace. All right, stand by. Stand by, everybody. Those watching on Facebook and YouTube, we're going to keep going. Okay. All right. If you like this type of information, please support us through Cash App and through PayPal, Cash App, $TheAHN Show, $TheAHN Show, and through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHN Show. Let's see, Cash App, $TheAHN Show, SHOW. Okay, so we have up here on the screen the real Cash App account for the African History Network, It's $ TheAHNShow. That's our actual Cash App tag. And it has my name, Michael, and it shows my picture there. These other two are fake. I already reported them to Cash App. You sent money to the fake accounts, please let Cash App know so they can refund your money to you. You can send it to us if you like. Also through PayPal, paypal.me/TheAHNShow, or at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Be sure to register for the online course I teach on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. We deal with thousands of years of history and what led up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Our special guest speaker on Saturday, June 12th, will be Dr. David Imhotep. All first Americans were Africans, documented evidence. Okay, so it's 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's a 10-week online course I teach. Click right here to enroll. All this, we do the class live. All the sessions are recorded. So as soon as you register, you can go back and watch. The class from last week and week before that. Okay. And we're going to post a link here. You can register. You can start watching the content as soon as you register, and then you'll be ready for Saturday's class. And you'll still have access to the course even after, the course is over with. It's half off right now. It's on sale $60. It's on sale $60. All right, let's continue here. Okay. Let's continue. I want to go back to this clip from All In with Chris Hayes, and then I want you to hear the interview that he did with historian Dr. Carol Anderson. And I'm waiting for this. So I got the interview off the podcast. If you go to msnbc.com, a lot of the primetime shows, there's also an audio podcast of each episode of the show. So the interview, they have like the podcast of like the full show that airs on MSNBC. They have a full audio podcast of a lot of those shows. So I got the interview with Dr. Carol Anderson. I DVR'd it, of course, but I got it from the podcast, the audio podcast. So, because I got to get this information out by any means necessary. To understand what was, you have to understand what is, you have to understand what was. To understand what is today, you have to understand the past, what was, and how this came into existence. Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. This is what politics is. Politics is the legal distribution. I ain't say it's the fair distribution. It's the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. And racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Okay, this is what racism is. All right, let me cue this clip back up. Let's go back to this article here from history.com. So I did a lot of research for today's show, so I have a ton of information on this. We're not going to be able to get to all of it. In 1898, Williams versus Mississippi, U.S. Supreme Court case, upheld the state's poll taxes, disenfranchisement clauses, grandfather clauses, and literacy tests on the basis that the new Constitution did not, quote, discriminate between the races, and it has been shown that their actual administration was not evil, only that evil was possible under them, end quote. The Williams versus Mississippi ruling eased the implementation of voter suppression statutes in many other states, including Louisiana, South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Virginia, and Georgia. That Supreme Court case of 1898 made it easier for these other states to implement various types of voter restrictions, grandfather clauses, literacy tests, etc. So read this full article here from history.com, the official website of the History Channel. How Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. How Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. This is from history.com. This is from May 13th, 2021 by Pharrell Evans. Okay, let me see something here. Okay, I want to go to this clip here. Okay, we've got this queued up. Let me go back to this clip here from All In with Chris Hayes. So all of this is connected. Okay, this isn't just stuff in the past. This impacts us today. And then we see what happened in Florida today. Florida bans teaching critical race theory in schools. Florida bans teaching critical race theory in schools. But there's no real effort to teach critical race theory in K through 12. That's something taught at the graduate school level in college and law school. Okay, let's go to this clip here. Just a second. Let me cue this back up where we left off.
Because they know they do not represent the majority of the American people.
Wild to hear that, right? The statement is just as true now as it was 58 years ago. Everything old is new again. If you do not have this historical context, it is hard to truly appreciate what we are seeing in front of our faces. But that history is largely not taught in schools. People don't hear about Reconstruction and all that it represented. People don't know that the state of South Carolina had a majority black lower house of state legislature in 1868. That Mississippi had a black senator in 1970. I mean, I heard about it. I was lucky enough to have great teachers. Thank you, Mr. Kagan. But even that, not a ton. And that brings us to the assault on history that Republicans are now pairing with their assault on voting rights. It's a kind of pincer movement, right? So they are digging in the archives for methods of voter suppression and targeted attacks on enfranchisement of black and brown folks, an attempt to roll back multiracial democracy to stop it from becoming real, while also attacking the teaching of the history that would illuminate to people why that effort is so dangerous, why it happened before and why it won last time and why it put us where we are now. And so state after state, Fox News and Republicans, conservatives have whipped up a moral panic about so-called critical race theory. More than 20 states have either introduced legislation to ban critical race theory or banned it altogether. Now, critical race theory is an actual doctrine, academic method started by a bunch of scholars of color in the 70s and 80s. It attempts to question some of the race-neutral assumptions about law and power and how they function, particularly in the U.S. I will tell you, I am not an expert at it. I've read some of it. Like any school of thought, there are critics in the field and between scholars within the field. I don't think it's the definitive word on race and the law or American history. But it's a very different thing than how the term has been applied by conservative activists. A few months ago, Chris Rufo, one of the conservative activists who's pursuing this moral panic, whipping up, gave the game away, tweeting, quote, "The goal is to have the public read something crazy in the newspaper and immediately think critical race theory. We have decodified the term and it will recodify it to annex the entire range of cultural constructions that are unpopular with Americans." Just pure cynicism. If you don't like it, then it's critical race theory. That's what he's saying. If you don't like it, if you don't want your white children being taught that, say, white terrorists murdered black people throughout the South in a successful campaign to end the experiment of multiracial democracy and replace it with authoritarian apartheid, well, then that's critical race theory. You see how that works? So now the Republicans are railing about free speech to basically make it impossible or even criminal to teach certain things in schools. But it's all part of the same story, right? They're running back to the old tactics from the past while making it harder at the same time for people to learn the truth about that past. Mm-hmm. These are two fronts in the same war. It's the oldest battle in this country. Are we going to be a democracy for everyone or not?
Okay, so I want to go to, so that was the first segment. Then the interview that he did with, that Chris Hayes did with Dr. Carol Anderson. Want to go to that next. And they need to post that clip of the interview with her because it was fantastic. And she ties all this history together to what's going on right now. So let me cue this up. She comes on about 13 minutes, 10 seconds into the show. So just
possible or even criminal to teach certain things in schools. But it's all part of the same story, right? They're running back to the old tactics from the past while making it harder at the same time for people to learn the truth about that past. These are two fronts in the same war. It's the oldest battle in this country. Are we going to be a democracy for everyone or not? Carol Anderson has devoted her life's work to this topic. She's the chair of African American Studies at Emory University, where she focuses on public policy, issues of race, justice, equality in the United States. She's also the author of several award-winning books, including One Person, No Vote, How Voter Suppression is Destroying Our Democracy. Her latest just out this month titled The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America, and she joins me now. Professor, some of this history I think I learned from your book on voting rights, or it was recalled to me. What do you see as a scholar of this when you hear Mitch McConnell say that phrase, well, it's already illegal against the law to discriminate voting on the basis of race?
What I hear is the folks at the Mississippi Convention of 1890, where they combined all of the different disfranchising mechanisms into one, and did so knowing that it was designed to remove Black people from the rolls, but in a race-neutral way, so that they could stay under the radar of the 15th Amendment and get judicial approval for disfranchising large swaths of Black people, but do so legally.
That history, which is that because of the presence of the 15th Amendment, the effort to roll back democracy in the South between 1870 and 1964, let's say, had to be undertaken with this bad faith, this excuse, to me is one of the most toxic, sort of legacies we have from that period, and also something that it's very hard to not see in a lot of places you look these days.
Absolutely, because one of the things to justify these new regulations, these new laws, these new constitutions, was to say we're going after election integrity. We're cleaning up corruption at the ballot box. So it was to use the excuse of massive rampant voter fraud in order to remove Black people from the rolls, and to do so in a way that seemed legitimate. Who could be against anybody wanting election integrity? Who could be against anybody wanting to end corruption at the ballot box? And so to swaddle the killing of American democracy in the flag of democracy is what they did in 1890. And it's what we're seeing.
Okay, let me back this up. See, this is why it's so important to understand history. To understand what was, you have to understand what is, you have to understand what was. One of my teachers, Professor Kaba Hiawatha Kamene, and this is one of the T-shirts that he sells. Okay, this is one of the T-shirts that he sells here with the Cobra and the Black Panther. He says to understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. To understand the existence of something, you must first understand the pre-existence of existence. What I say is, a people's history and culture teaches them how to deal with the problems of the past, in the present, and the future to meet the needs of the community. So I want to back this up. What she's talking about is how historically you had allegations of corruption at the ballot box. Okay, and this was used to disenfranchise African Americans and suppress the African American vote. Okay, let me see, where do we leave off here?
In order that the South should be a peaceful, bucolic land. And that becomes the narrative of Negro domination, Negro rule. And it is insidious and it is inaccurate.
It's also everywhere. I mean, modern tech books, when they read about Andrew Johnson, or the radical Republicans, I mean, even modern textbooks. And this brings us to this big fight now, right? So look, history is always going to be contested in every place in the world, right? It's not some fixed thing. It's always going to be contested. It's always going to be a subtext for political battles in the present. And debate is good. I don't think there's some final word on any of this, and I want to be clear about that. But I saw this picture. This is Loudoun County, Virginia. This is parents packed into a very packed, parent meeting about whether they're teaching critical race theory in the school and whether it should be banned. And when you see these fights happening in state after state, what goes through your mind as both an educator and a scholar of this history?
Is that what we're seeing is a battle to control the narrative in a way that allows bad policy to be based on bad history. Mm-hmm. So it is to ignore the role of slavery and Jim Crow in American history. It is to ignore what the genocidal removal of indigenous people has meant to American history. When you remove that history, and then you have these cardboard cutouts of the founding fathers that don't treat them like human beings who are making decisions, good decisions and bad decisions, but instead are simply heroic, then what you have is that you're not able to explain how we got here, what we're dealing with. And it's what allows a Mitch McConnell to say, we don't need a Voting Rights Act because we can't discriminate on the basis of race. That is to ignore that it is on the basis of race that you get race-neutral language targeted at African Americans using the vestiges of slavery, using poverty, using wealthlessness. With the literacy test, it was using the systematic denial of education.
Donald Trump.
And what we ended up with in 1940, as the U.S. is getting ready to start the Second World War, is that only 3% of African Americans, age-eligible African Americans, were registered to vote in the United States. 3% using this race-neutral laws.
Carol Anderson, whose scholarship on this has informed my own thinking about it so much. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for this.
All right. Excellent. Excellent interview there. So Dr. Carol Anderson is breaking down the history, okay? And to understand what's taking place, you have to understand the history because we see this history repeating itself. We see the rampant allegations of voter fraud. So now you have to institute all these new voter restriction bills to stamp out this widespread voter fraud that doesn't exist. Okay, sure, there were voting irregularities here and there. Sure, there were there were a handful of cases of voter fraud, but those were individuals. In Pennsylvania, you had 3 cases where Trump supporters voted for Trump twice. The GOP is not talking about that. They don't want to mention that. But it wasn't widespread voter fraud. It wasn't widespread coordinated voter fraud, especially anything that's going to change the outcome of any elections. Okay, they know this. At the same time, they want to say, oh, you had all this voter fraud, but you had over 200 Republicans that were reelected in the House of Representatives. None of them say that any of the fraudulent votes were for Republicans. You were on the same ballot as Donald Trump. So your argument is that Democrats rigged the election so Joe Biden would beat Donald Trump, but didn't rig it well enough for Jamie Harrison to beat Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina after all the tens of millions of dollars that Jamie Harrison won. Your argument is Democrats rigged the election so Joe Biden would beat Donald Trump, but didn't rig it so Mitch McConnell would be defeated in Kentucky. So Amy McGrath would beat Mitch McConnell in Kentucky. Okay. They didn't rig it there. They just rigged it for Trump, but it's on the same ballot. So your argument is only the fraudulent votes were only for Joe Biden, but none of the fraudulent votes were for any of the Republicans that were reelected. And they're on the same ballot. Okay, read. So let me post the link here. This is when you go to MSNBC and like their primetime shows, when you go to their pages, they have the podcast also, the audio podcast. That's the link to the podcast from All In with Chris Hayes. That's from June 9th, 2021. Very quickly here, if we go to go back to the article from the Washington Post, then I have to get out if you have a lot of work to do. And I have to get ready for Saturday's class as well. Look at this. Go back to the article from Washington Post. Mississippi's 1890 convention sought to find a way around the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which gave African Americans the vote. Just 2 decades earlier, the Mississippi state legislature had made history by electing Hiram Revels to the U.S. Senate. He was the first African American member to serve in either house of Congress, but that moment of racial progress quickly vanished. This is Hiram Rose Revels, first and only U.S. Senator from Mississippi. Okay, he was sworn in about 1870 for Hiram Rose Revels. After President Rutherford B. Hayes removed all federal troops from southern states in 1877, white Democrats who supported slavery and the Confederacy began regaining control of the states from black and white Republicans. This was the Compromise of 1877, which Republicans were complicit in. Republicans, because neither one of the candidates, Rutherford B. Hayes or Samuel J. Tilden, because neither one of them had enough electoral college votes in the 1876 presidential election to become president. This goes on, this whole trying to figure out who's going to be the president, all this goes on for months. So they decide, Republicans tell the Democrats, look, we'll remove the Union troops out of the South if you let Rutherford B. Hayes become president, the Republican become president. This is what happens. And this reverses a lot of the gains that African Americans were making. And then you have these black codes that are going to be solidified, these Jim Crow era laws being solidified. Nearly all of the Mississippi Convention's 134 delegates were Democrats, with one African-American Republican. A white Republican named Marsh Cook had campaigned for a seat vowing to protect the rights of African-American voters. A few weeks before the convention, his bullet-riddled body was found on a rural road. The Jackson Clarion Ledger lamented the murder. The newspaper there, the Jackson Clarion Ledger lamented the murder, but added, quote, for those who did it felt they were doing their country a service and removing a man who had become so offensive. He was standing up for the right of African Americans, but that was offensive. It sounds kind of like Republicans today, and a lot of these Republican governors who are saying critical race theory is divisive, it's offending white people, it's offending white children, is not being taught in schools. They're not teaching critical race theory in school, so why are you trying to ban it? At the convention, one delegate candidly summarized the dilemma of white Democrats. Quote, it is no secret that there has not been a full vote and a fair count in Mississippi since 1875. That, in plain words, we have been stuffing ballots, committing perjury, carrying the elections by fraud and violence. We have been stuffing ballots, committing perjury, carrying the elections by fraud and violence, end quote. He suggested a way to weed out unqualified voters, proposing to require that a voter, quote, must read and write the English language, or he is disbarred from the privilege of voting, end quote. Most of the state's African Americans were former slaves who have been denied an education. Now, this is Democrat admitting that the Democrats have been stuffing the ballots. This is before the party realignment that completes in the 1960s. This is before the Lily White movement in 1928, where Republicans push African Americans out of the Republican Party and we go over to the Democratic Party. This is way before that. At the convention, the 1890 convention, Mississippi, one delegate candidly summarized the dilemma of white Democrats. Quote, "It is no secret that there has not been a full vote and a fair count in Mississippi since 1875. That in plain words, we have been stuffing ballots, committing perjury, carrying the elections by fraud and violence," end quote. The Jackson Clarion Ledger wrote, "Men who can't read, quote, are not of character to entrust the ballot," end quote. A plan of this kind would disenfranchise few white people, denying the ballot only to the idle and thriftless class, end quote. Well, who are they talking about? They're saying, oh, it's only going to exclude a few white people. Well, who are you trying to exclude? Who's the target? Now, if we go down here, the convention, the 1890 convention, let's see, delegates rightly foresaw that white registrars would ask white voters simple questions while demanding that African Americans answer complex questions. So when you ask these questions by the registrar, the white people are going to get simple softball questions. They're going to ask complex questions to African Americans to exclude them from voting. In the following years, African American voters in the state of Mississippi were asked such things as, quote, "How many bubbles are in a bar of soap?" How many bubbles are in a bar of soap? The 1890 Mississippi State Convention also adopted a $2 poll tax, equal to about $58 today, that disproportionately eliminated African American voters, most of whom were very poor. The only African American delegate, Isaiah T. Montgomery, he may be related to Tim Scott, I'm not sure, supported these requirements, supported these restrictions that would disproportionately hurt African Americans. He was the founder and mayor of Bayou, Mississippi, Isaiah T. Montgomery. He was a landowner. He's a successful African American man, former slave. He had been enslaved by the brother of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, white supremacist Jefferson Davis, slave owner Jefferson Davis of Mississippi. He was enslaved. He had been enslaved by the brother of Jefferson Davis. Isaiah T. Montgomery, an educated and successful businessman, said that Mississippi's uneducated African Americans would approve of the restrictions for the good of the state. Isaiah T. Montgomery, his optimistic view was that African Americans would be treated equally as their education level rose. They would be treated equally as their education level rose. Quote, "The two great races shall peaceably travel side by side, each mutually assisting the other to mount higher," end quote. He declared in a nationally publicized speech at the convention. This is a picture of Isaiah T. Montgomery. Okay, now this was going to pass without his vote. Ain't like he had the tie-breaking vote or something. This was going to pass without his vote, but he went along with it. He reminds me of Tim Scott. He reminds me of Senator Tim Scott. Revered African-American abolitionist Frederick Douglass said Isaiah T. Montgomery, quote, "commits unconscionable treason to his race in surrendering his franchise," end quote. Frederick Douglass said of Isaiah T. Montgomery, quote, he commits unconscionable treason to his race in surrendering his franchise, end quote. Earlier, African Americans from 40 counties in Mississippi had protested to President Benjamin Harrison, the U.S. president at the time, there in 1890, but he declined to intervene. President Benjamin Harrison declined to intervene. The Mississippi State Convention adopted on November 1st, 1890, the Mississippi State Convention adopted the state constitution on November 1st, 1890, adding the new requirements to a provision allowing voting by male residents aged 21 and older, quote, "except idiots insane persons and Indians non-taxed, end quote, except idiots, insane persons, and Indians non-taxed, end quote. There's a lot of people in a lot of Republicans wouldn't be able to vote then because it said it excludes idiots. A lot of them wouldn't be able to vote. Now, when Northern newspapers denounced the literacy test as discriminatory, one Mississippi state senator responded, quote, "I deny that the educational test was intended to exclude Negroes from voting. The sole purpose was to exclude persons of both races who from want of intelligence are unsafe depositors of political power. That more Negroes will be excluded is true, but that is not our fault." So they're saying, look, we ain't craft this law to purposely discriminate against African Americans, but the fact that it does, well, it's just the way it is. Whoop, there it is. No, they're sounding like Mitch McConnell. And Mitch McConnell is saying, well, it's already illegal to discriminate against African Americans. Therefore, you don't need the John Lewis bill. Therefore, you don't need HR 1. You don't need the For the People Act because it's already illegal. But it's taking place. That rationale was rejected a decade later by James Vardaman, the white supremacist who became governor of Mississippi in 1903. James Vardaman said, quote, "There is no use to equivocate or lie about the matter." Quote, "Mississippi's Constitutional Convention of 1890 was held for no other purpose than to eliminate the N-word from politics." That's what he said. He called us the N-word. To eliminate the N-word from politics. Not the ignorant and vicious, as some of the apologists would have you believe. He's saying, no, he's making it plain. He said, no, it's to eliminate the Negro. And this is what Solomon Saladin Calhoun, who was the convention's president in 1890 and a white county judge, this is what he said. He said in 1890, he said, "Let's tell the truth if it burst the bottom of the universe. We have come here to exclude the Negro. Nothing short of this will answer. We have come here to exclude the Negro." So when we see these attacks, we have to understand, if the vote didn't matter, why would they be working so hard to suppress our vote? Why would they have 361 bills in 47 state legislatures? It takes time to write these bills. They're not written on the back of a napkin. It takes time to research and write these bills. If our vote didn't matter, why would they be working so hard to suppress our vote? Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. That's why these people who keep voting against us in passing these voter restriction bills, that's why we have to organize and vote them out of office and continue to push our issues, push our bills, get this stuff passed. You need 60 votes in the Senate to get most bills passed, not 50. Yeah, you need to get rid of the filibuster. Okay. And we have to put pressure on these various senators, not just Senator Joe Manchin, but others, Senator Kristen Sinema, and things like that, others like that. There was a article here from, lastly, and I have to get out of here. One from Reuters. Well, actually, let's look at this. Senate.gov. This is a better source. Senate.gov about filibusters and cloture. So you can read about the filibuster and the history of the filibuster. Okay. About filibusters and cloture. Right here, Senate.gov, official website of the U.S. Senate. The Senate tradition of unlimited debate has allowed for the use of the filibuster, a loosely defined term for action designed to prolong debate and delay or prevent a vote on a bill, resolution, amendment, or other debatable question. Prior to 1917, the Senate rules did not provide for a way to end debate and force a vote on a measure. on a measure. That year, the Senate adopted a rule to allow a 2/3 majority to end a filibuster, a procedure known as cloture, to bring to a close. In 1975, the Senate reduced the number of votes required for cloture from 2/3 of a senator's voting to 3/5 of all senators duly chosen and sworn, or 60 of the 100-member Senate. Okay, so 60. You need 60 votes to get most of these bills, unless it's for a judge or something through the Senate budget reconciliation process. You need 60 votes to get this stuff passed. That's why the filibuster needs to be done away with, so you can get bills passed with a simple majority of 51 in the Senate. All right, that's enough radio for today. I got to get out of here. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, $ the AHN Show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN Show, paypal.me/the AHN Show, and at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Be sure to register for the online course I teach on Saturdays, 12 noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Maafa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, where they didn't teach you in school. Our special guest speaker Saturday, June 12th, will be Dr. David Imhotep, author of the book, The First Americans Were Africans, Documented Evidence. We'll post the link here. You can register for the online course. And I'll be speaking in Atlanta. I'll be there Friday, June 18th through Sunday, June 20th at the 9th Annual Juneteenth Festival at Centennial Park. I'll be speaking that Saturday and Sunday, 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. at the amphitheater at Centennial Park. I'll also have a vendor booth there all 3 days, so come check me out. And if you want to, when you support the African History Network through Cash App and PayPal, or even register for the class, this will help me get to and from Atlanta, because I have expenses that I have to cover as well, traveling there and back. Visit JuneteenthATL.com. This is for the 9th Annual Juneteenth Atlanta Parade and Music Festival. Arrested Development is performing this year. Angie Stone's performing as well. They have about 100 or so African American vendors and Caribbean vendors, African vendors. They have all types of entertainment. So check out the website for more information. This is free and open to the public.